This is a bad way to start anything, but I guess I have to be honest with you. I don't do anything anymore. Now that's a heavy statement to make, but it's pretty true. Not that this is a recent thing, but it's gotten worse. I recently finished college, and like most grads, I can't find a job. You know how it goes. Can't get experience without getting a job, and can't get a job because you don't have the experience. It's a shitty cycle, and it starts to get to you. You can only keep yourself motivated for so long before that drive just disappears. As I was saying, it got worse recently. Most of my friends have found employment or moved away. It wasn't their fault my social life took a nosedive. I kind of stopped trying. It was like I was too nervous to even ask people to hang out anymore. I had this unshakable fear in me that somehow, during the process of talking to them, they'd realize what a shitty person I'd become, and that they had absolutely no reason to associate with me anymore. And even when I did get the courage to ask someone out, I never actually wanted to go anywhere. I didn't have the energy to do anything, and the times I did somehow manage to leave my house, I became absolutely drained emotionally. So I stopped leaving my parents' home. Sometimes I didn't even turn on the lights in my room. Just sat in the dark, checking the internet, waiting for the day to end so I could sleep again. I've always been a dreamer. Maybe it's from having a creative mind or something. But sleeping was my way of getting out. It was the only part of the day where I didn't feel like I was a complete failure. I had no responsibilities. I could close my eyes, rest, and not give a single fuck about anything going on. It was a natural progression that over time I started sleeping more and more. The dreams I had while unconscious were interesting. And no matter what I did, I couldn't achieve a single thing in the waking world. It got so bad that I couldn't even be awake for longer than 4 hours at a time. When you're sleeping that much, it becomes harder and harder to keep track of what is a dream and what actually happens. This consistent napping went on for almost 2 months without interruption, aside from the various shouting matches with family members over how I'd become a burden. I knew I should have spent more time looking for a job, but every time I tried, my mind would lock up, and I'd just get too exhausted to do anything. Maybe part of me had accepted that it was pointless to even try anymore. I suppose it was a matter of time before the stress of being alive got to me as I slept. In my dreams, everything was so crystal clear, and the images my mind played out were almost perfect representations of the real world. I could feel the texture of objects, touch anything, and my brain would process it with such unbelievable clarity. Even my dreams started to feel linked together somehow, as if I was watching one story play out. There were always gigantic buildings, like skyscrapers that twisted and turned in impossible ways. Sometimes they coil around each other, and it almost seemed like they were forming spiderwebs. Just looking at them gave you this dreadful feeling that they were going to collapse in any second. Around the inconceivable formations, you could always hear metal being ground, stretched, and pounded on. The buildings themselves seemed completely impossible to enter. As I looked at the buildings, I noticed a reflection in the glass. There was a figure dressed in a yellow jacket behind me, though I could never seem to find it when I looked around for the source. Even in the reflection, all it did was stand there and watch me from a distance. I wasn't sure if it was even capable of moving. It seemed to be completely bound to the reflection of the glass. The dreams always had other people in them. I'd remember talking to them, but at no point would I ever call them anything. It was almost like they didn't have names. I don't even remember knowing anyone who looked like these men and women that populated the world that my mind had constructed. I'd spend most of these dreams doing normal things, eating, ranting, and gambling on occasion. My dream friends seemed real in their own ways. They each had their own way of reacting to things. They'd talk about family members that I'd never met, or go on about their hobbies. It was the closest thing I had to real conversation in weeks. It just happened to be in my own little dream world. It was almost like the time that I still had friends, back when I made the efforts to leave my house. Well, except for one strange moment that occurred in every single dream. Without fail, in every dream, one of the people would always ask, "Is it watching you?" In this sort of panicked way. Once, while I was in a dream about a drunken game of tag, it happened between rounds when everyone had stopped to get a drink. One of the people involved grabbed me and dug his fingernails into my shoulders and shouted the question at me. Even in a dream, the list of possible responses to that aren't much more than a stupid, unfitting, "What?" After that, the guy looked at me, seemingly just as confused as I was. And then suddenly, for a single second, it was as if something was watching me. Slightly out of sight, but my eyes still picked up that yellow color. Things like that went on for a couple of weeks. Sure, it was slightly unsettling, but it still seemed better than being awake. It was easy enough to ignore that one moment of disorientation. Still, maybe I should have paid more attention to what was going on around me. The buildings were changing slowly. It was almost as if they were growing out. They became more complex in the way that they twisted and formed, and the sounds from inside rumbled louder and louder. Once I had noticed the changes, it was only a few days before they had completely blocked out the sky. That's when my friends changed on me. They no longer asked me, "Is it watching you?" like they had every other night. No. Now the panicked words that fell out of people's mouths simply became, I should go now. It's here now." I didn't understand what was going on to make everything change. Sure, I'd been sleeping a little more than normal to see how the dreams were going to change, but how was I supposed to respond when these delusions that built themselves as one thing suddenly changed completely? After a while, there stopped being people around altogether, and the air carried an uncomfortable weight to it. When I looked up, I could see that the buildings that entrapped the sky were slowly constricting. The idea of it all falling down stopped seeming like a slight concern and became an undeniable reality. The sound that was produced as everything shook and moved around in the world was unlike anything that I'd ever heard before. It was a loud pounding that made the inside of my skull feel as if it had been ripped open, like something was slowly grinding away at my very brain. Every dream after this point was just wandering through this slowly decaying land and trying desperately to keep my head atop my body. Some nights I swear I could see that yellow thing move just barely out of my line of sight. It was getting brave and almost letting me see it then. Still, any attempts to find it on my terms ended up fruitless. It started to mess with me when I was awake. In fact, it stopped feeling like I'd slept at all. My head would wake up pounding like it had done in the dream. At this point, I tried to do anything to avoid sleeping. At least while I was awake, I could numb the sting inside my skull with painkillers. The only problem is that when you're downing 3 pills every 2 hours, it makes keeping your eyes open just a little bit difficult. Despite my efforts, I finally did fall asleep. And this time the dream world was nothing more than twisted metal forming claustrophobic hallways. The pounding sounds rang out all around. God, it seemed as if it was the fucking heartbeat of whatever beast had consumed my dreams. I had to run. There had to be some way out of this place. The sound grew louder and louder as if it was testing my will. It wanted me to quit, sit down, and give up, just like I had on every other aspect of my life. It was in my crazed moment of utter madness that I saw it. At first, I thought what I had found was a large opening, almost like the inside of a chapel. The metal twisted and formed in strange patterns that seemed to symbolize something that was beyond my grasp of understanding. in the middle of the room was where I first laid eyes on it. It looked like a man in a yellow raincoat. In a moment of complete fucking stupidity, I yelled, "Hey!" at it. A profound feeling of regret instantly filled my stomach as the thing twitched and struggled to turn around. It was almost as if, after each and every movement, it fell apart. One moment it would look like some sort of human, the next it would be closer to an animal. Each and every single breath this monster took caused my brain to scream at me. It was as if my eyes couldn't process what was in front of me, and the yellow thing was grabbing every memory, every thought, every single day of my life and trying to make it have a shape. It must have known what was going on in my mind, because there was a second among all the clashing occurring in my skull that I swore I heard it laugh. The wailing within my mind grew louder and louder. It must have gotten closer. My brain wouldn't work. It couldn't tell my eyes to shut or my legs to move. I couldn't run. My eyes were locked onto it. They were still desperately trying to pin some sort of form to the monster. Through the pain, I saw the texture of its skin, and something about it caused my mind to connect it to the first thing that I could think of. A goddamn raincoat! It was so close now. It hid inside its hood. The outline of its eyes stood barely buried behind the black tar-like liquid that leaked from its face. At least that's the only thing that I can describe it as. Though I'm not very sure that I can call it as such. I could feel its breath as it got closer, and I was just trapped there, as if my feet were hammered to the floor. I knew this is where I was going to die. This would be how it all fucking ended. I was going to watch whatever it was devour me alive with the jaws that my mind was unable to fully process. I felt it rip at my skin. I saw my organs sprawled out over jagged shapes, still impossible to describe. No tears, no screams. I just watched. My mind lost itself to both the sight of it and the pain of every single movement. And the last sounds that I heard were the grinding of teeth as it devoured my flesh. And then I woke up, covered in a horrible cold sweat. I sobbed and screamed before I finally realized that somehow I was actually awake. Part of me wanted to cry tears of joy after that. None of it was real. I was perfectly fine, and everything was alright. It was all just a dream. It was all going to be normal again. It was all a simple nightmare, and nothing more. It was freeing in a way. It felt like it was all over then. No matter what happened next, it seemed like I'd faced the worst. Whatever that monster was, it was gone forever. I could get back to being normal. Maybe even start leaving my house again. Everything felt like it was going to be fine. Up until that horrible sense of exhaustion snuck up on me. My eyes got heavy, and before I knew it, I was back in its chapel. My arms and legs bolted to the walls. No matter how much I struggled, there was no way to free myself, and then I realized that all around me were the people I had seen in my dreams, just as trapped as I was, and in the middle of it all was the beast in that fucking raincoat. It approached each person pinned to the wall, and slowly but meticulously eviscerated each one, pulling, biting, and twitching in illogical ways as it did so. Every movement it made set my mind into a dizzying frenzy. The crushing motions of every single step it took triggered a chorus of screams, slowly building and building until the second it reached me. Its neck snapped and twisted in an indescribable way as it struggled to turn its head toward me. Somehow, during all the screaming and rampant panic, it allowed my brain one moment of peace. A single second to see its teeth curl into a grin before its hidden eyes flashed an unholy red light. And finally I felt it. Its nails dug into my legs. I felt my muscles and skin slowly split and rip apart. I was trapped inside this thing's heart. It ruled here, a horrid god within a chamber of twisted metal. Compared to that, I was nothing more than a pathetic scrap of rotting meat, destined to face its jaws over and over. It would never let go of something once it had sunk its teeth into it. Its claws and jagged fangs dragged across the metal walls behind me. Through what remained of my shredded form, I learned one thing in those last moments. Finally, I knew what had caused the sounds that I'd heard since this started. Every time I close my eyes to sleep, I find myself in his chapel, torn apart each and every night I dare sleep. While I'm awake, it's difficult to focus for even a second, knowing what monster awaits me in my dreams. It's getting to me. It's getting to me. I've been trying to tell myself over and over and over and over again. It's just a dream, but it all feels so real. I don't do anything anymore because I can't. It stops me. It has me terrified of even closing my eyes. I'm not sure how much longer I can last. Even now, it's becoming uncomfortably tempting. It would just be so easy. I would just have to down all those painkillers. That would stop everything. Then I could rest. Then I could finally rest.